Hi, everybody. Sorry, we're just a couple of minutes late. Once again, trying to set up the YouTube live stream and not having much success. Welcome to Junction Reads. I am so excited to talk to Cheuk Kwan about his collection of essays, Have You Eaten Yet? And I'm excited to talk to you guys about it. And Cheuk Kwan, welcome to Junction Reads. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we officially get started, I will start with a land acknowledgement, and please feel free from wherever you are joining us to share an acknowledgement of the land from which you are joining us. I am in Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wendat Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. I am specifically in Adubagok, the place of the alders in Michisageek language. Both are still home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and I am so grateful to have the opportunity to work on their territory. Cheuk Kwan, thank you so much for joining us. I meant to ask you actually, is it Chuck or yes, perfect.
Got it right first time.
Welcome. I am very thrilled that you're joining us. I have been looking at trailers of the documentary series, and it's so thrilling. The global narrative and traveling around the world to visit these Chinese restaurants. It's a thrill. I feel lucky that you're here and that you decided to turn these films into a book. It's my favorite media, and I'm very grateful that you're joining us. Before we get started, would you like to share with everyone what you're reading right now?
Well, I am reading Brown Bear, Brown Bear.
Oh.
I just happen to be a new grandfather to twins. So I've been, that's part of my part-time reading. But just seriously, I've been reading this book called Agent Sonia. It's a nonfiction book about a Russian spy working in China. She's German.
Yeah.
And she went to China to spy for Russia during the Sino-Japanese War. And then during the World War II, she was in the UK, living in UK and spying for Russia on the atomic secrets of the US-UK atomic bomb project. And wow. She's like one of the highest ranking master spy that Russia ever had in the West. So I'm always fascinated by John le Carre and all the other spy novels. So this is a nonfiction spy story.
Have they made a documentary or any film of it?
It should be made into actually a film. It would be a good film.
Yeah, it sounds like
she's basically a quote unquote housewife with 3 kids living in the British countryside. And but all this time she was this master spy for Russia.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. Highly recommended.
No, I need to read more nonfiction. I realize every time I read a nonfiction book with Junction Reads, I'm always blown away, and I think I need to read more nonfiction. It needs to be. I need to have a list created. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, as they say, proof is stranger than fiction.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's as you were describing it, I thought this sounds like a film. And then you said John le Carre, and I was like, it sounds like a John le Carre film.
Exactly. Yeah.
Before we hear you read from Have You Eaten Yet? Would you mind if I share your biography with everybody?
Please. Yeah. Yeah.
Cheuk Kwan was born in Hong Kong and grew up in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. He has also lived in the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. Cheuk speaks English, Japanese, French, and several Chinese dialects. Cheuk is the co-founder of The Asianadian, a magazine dedicated to promoting Asian Canadian arts, culture, and politics, and a film production company, Tisa Films. His cinematic works, Song of the Exile, Latin Passions, and Beyond Frontiers, braid his personal experiences with his love of travel and appreciation for Chinese culture worldwide. He currently lives in Toronto. Cheuk, thank you so much. I'm excited to hear you read.
Okay, I'm reading from a chapter from Brazil. And this is a place that I visited in Sao Paulo. It's run by a couple who had immigrated to Brazil some 20 years or 30 years earlier. So the title of the book is called the title of the chapter is called The Great Escape. And you'll see why. The Great Escape. Just before midnight on a moonless night in October 1967, 19-year-old Li Hoshao and his friend plunged into the water and began their 4-hour swim to freedom. It had taken them 4 days to get to the coast from their village. There was no turning back now. Li had been working in the People's Commune since he was 12, one of the many agricultural collectives created during China's Great Leap Forward in 1958, which was undertaken to transform the country into a communist society and surpass the West. Instead, tens of millions died in what came to be known as the Great Chinese Famine. The Cultural Revolution began 8 years later, further throwing China into a decade of political and social turmoil. Like millions living in the southeastern province of Guangdong, Li wanted to escape. He looked toward the British colony of Hong Kong and the nearby Portuguese colony of Macau for possible refuge. Hong Kong offered better economic opportunities, but it was situated at the other end of the Pearl River estuary. Macau, connected by land to his village in Junction, was closer. But fleeing overland to Macau was both difficult and dangerous because guards constantly patrolled the border and would open fire indiscriminately. Many became freedom swimmers. For 4 to 6 hours, they would cling to rubber tubes, football cores, and other makeshift flotation devices, battling the cold, the tides, and even sudden storms. Some were picked up by patrolling Chinese gunboats. The unlucky ones, attacked by sharks or overcome by cramps or fatigue, simply drowned. For a year, Li and his friend planned the escape to Macau. They scouted locations where they could slip into the water and consulted the almanac on the current flow and the tides in the area. Although he was a good swimmer, Li nonetheless trained to get into shape. An opportunity came up and we had to leave in a hurry, he recalls as we sit at his restaurant in a quiet neighborhood in Sao Paulo. Li is in his mid-50s, but has not lost his swimmer's physique, firm and tan. Without proper travel documents, the two friends had to hike at night, as unfamiliar faces in nearby villages would arouse suspicion. When they reached the shore near Macau, they put their last sets of clean clothes into plastic bags. There were patrols with German shepherds passing by every 20 minutes. We waited for 10 minutes after they passed, and then, putung. He uses his hand and the Chinese onomatopoeia to describe their jump into this water. About half an hour into the swim, Li's friend began to have cramps and decided to give up. Li continued on alone. He was already in the water, he reasoned, and there was no turning back. A little later, he changed his mind and swam back to look for his friend. It took half an hour to find him, he says. He asked why I didn't just leave him behind. I said, if we are caught, at least we'll be together. If we reach our destination, we'll get there together. That's what friends are for. 4 hours later, they climb ashore near Macau Electric's power plant, joining thousands of others who had made it that year. Not daring to flag down a bus, they found a sympathetic tricycle driver who pedaled them to safety at the home of Lee's aunt. I couldn't sleep that night. I was still in awe that I had made it, Lee says, more than 30 years later. This would make for a good movie, I told him. Even if I've heard similar stories many times before, I'm in awe of what he's done. Oh, it's nothing special, Lee says. There's no choice if you want freedom. So we now fast forward to 30 years later. In 2002, when I visited him in Brazil, Sao Paulo, during the World Cup of 2002. The steamed garupa comes to the table glistening in a glaze of soy, ginger, and scallions. The fish, which Li Hoshao and I bought in the morning at Sijep's, the third largest food wholesaler market in the world, was cooked with the same subtlety and to the perfect degree of doneness in the best seafood restaurants of Hong Kong. We are having our first dinner at Cheuk Kwan, which Li has chosen to open in a Tony tree-lined neighborhood, Villa Marina, with trendy eateries and a student-friendly atmosphere. The sign at the front says, Caridace in Culinaria Chinesa, quality Chinese cuisine. Jun Watanabe has joined us. He's tall and big for a Japanese. I first met him 3 months earlier by chance on my trip to the Amazon. He was working for a Japanese company in Manaus and has a good command of Portuguese. Having studied Spanish at university, the transition for him was sin problemas. He's a mirror image of me, a Japanese who grew up in Malaysia and Singapore, while I, a Singaporean Chinese, spent my adolescent years in Japan. We both studied engineering in the US and ended up working elsewhere in the world. Although not totally fluent, we can speak each other's native tongue. He has a reasonable command of Mandarin with a smattering of Cantonese, and I can converse easily in Japanese. Watanabe moved to Sao Paulo a month before we arrived, and is a great host, even arranging for our after-hours entertainment, some of it too rowdy to be described here. I miss half of these nocturnal excursions, leaving them to Kwa and Mark, who have more energy and alcohol capacity after a long day. But mostly, I enjoy eating with Watanabe. Having grown up in Southeast Asia, he knows his Chinese food. There's a table of Taiwanese Brazilians upstairs. As the food is carried up, the same dishes are served to us downstairs. Down-home watercress pork bone soup, a mixed platter of Cantonese barbecued meats, roast duck in lettuce wrap, served with scallion and hoisin sauce, a healthier version of the Peking duck, and la pièce de résistance, braised sea cucumber with Chinese mushroom. The latter dish is a perfect marriage of texture and taste. Chinese relish a wide variety of textures in their food, or, as Fusha Dunlop, the first Westerner to train at the Sichuan Higher Institute of Cuisine, calls it mouth-feel, from the Chinese word 口感, as you can get with jellyfish, duck tongue, and chicken feet, for example. The flavorless but high-protein slug-like sea cucumber lives at the bottom of the ocean floor. It is prized for its rubbery texture, as well as for its medicinal qualities, reportedly treating the likes of arthritis, high blood pressure, frequent urination, and even impotence. The mushrooms supply the umami. Wow, a truly movable feast. If Li were an architect, this would be his masterpiece of eclecticism. Is this authentic enough for you? The dinner is almost over when Li comes out from the kitchen. I have died and gone to heaven. I just can't suppress my effusive praise. The dinner was made for our guests upstairs, he says. The rest of my menu here is not as authentic. It's just to fool the Brazilians. He goes on to list the 4 top-selling Chinese dishes in Brazil: diced chicken with cashew nuts, beef with Chinese broccoli, sweet and sour pork, and shredded beef with onions. That's okay. They are what everyone here likes to eat, I say, trying to be sympathetic. Brazilians were taught to cook only with MSG and soy sauce, but not salt, he complains. Chinese restaurants here have all been cooking this way. I've eaten in Chinese restaurants the world over, and I know how challenging it is to maintain authenticity when customers' tastes don't conform to real Chinese food. Any cuisine will absorb foreign influences and incorporate new ingredients. Cashews are not native to China. Portuguese colonists in Brazil began exporting cashew nuts as early as the 1550s. But that doesn't make the diced chicken any less authentically Chinese. So cashew chicken is truly a Sino-Brazilian dish, he says with a laugh. For me, the test of authenticity is one's ability to evoke the memory of a childhood meal. At this time, Li's wife, Wang Yimxiang, emerges with one of my fondest food memories, a tray of egg tarts that came straight out of the oven piping hot. Wow, you're making your own egg tarts? Kwa jumps up in excitement. I've seen him devour egg tarts with gay abandon at dim sum lunches in Toronto. That's right, we're just learning. There's a small restaurant. We have to do everything ourselves, Wang says. I think she's trying a little too hard to be modest behind her sweet smile. Watanabe takes a first bite and gives his Goldilocks pronouncement. They're not too sweet, not too salty, they're just right. We are the only ones in Sao Paulo to make them like this. Li beams. Others are not as silky. Dan tat is a popular item in Hong Kong. Bakeries and Hong Kong-style cafes known as cha chan tang. The Cantonese egg tart has a delicate and creamy egg custard sitting in a golden flaky pastry, much lighter than its Portuguese counterpart, pastel de nata, which one finds on the streets here. It is claimed that the egg tart was inspired by the English custard tart. I contend that pastel de nata, called po tat in Hong Kong, introduced to the Portuguese colony of Macau, was more of a major influence on the Cantonese version. Sifu, have you ever thought of passing your skills to the next generation? Watanabe asks, using the Chinese word for martial arts master. I tried teaching both Chinese and Brazilians, he says with a sigh, but they could never get it. There's nothing I can do about it. Is it that hard to learn? I'm not sure. That's how I learn, watching my seafood. But it seems they aren't able to do so. The dishes taste different every day. No matter how many times I teach them, they still don't get it. I tried to teach them the proper way to roast, but they couldn't even control the rotation. The next afternoon, I watched Lee spend 4 hours roasting a suckling pig, Cantonese style, on a spit over a homemade porcelain tile charcoal pit at the back of the kitchen. The rotation by hand is slow, deliberate, and constant. After it's done, a Taiwanese customer pulls up in her BMW, loads the succulent carcass with golden crispy skin into the trunk, and drives away happy. That's my
Thank you so much. It's I'm smiling. Darlene just put in the chat, I'm so hungry, which is exactly how I felt at many points reading the book. What I loved was many of the essays include the dishes that people in the community want and demand and expect when they go to the restaurant, and that they're not at all like or not at all close to authentic Chinese food. I wonder if that was your experience with every restaurant that you went to, that there was this set of dishes that kind of bridged the cultural gap between where they were and where they come from, and if it is the authentic Chinese dishes that or the more authentic Chinese dishes that keep them most connected to home.
I think most Chinese restaurants would have a version of what you call a crossover.
Mm-hmm.
However, Canada happens to have the best Chinese food in the world.
Yay.
In the Chinese diaspora.
Right.
That's because of the large number of immigrants that came from Hong Kong and China in recent years, in the recent 2 or 3 decades. Mm-hmm. So they have the money, they have the demand, and they have the taste to ask for something like what they have back home. And mm-hmm. this makes for a good competition. So there are a lot of restaurants in Toronto, in Markham, Richmond Hill, where there are high concentration in where Chinese live, and also in Richmond, in Vancouver, mm-hmm. BC, where you would get pretty much a replica of a restaurant from Hong Kong with fish tanks and fresh seafood and nothing compromised.
Right.
So in that sense, we're lucky in Canada to have that kind of the so-called real Chinese food. But right. Other than that, if you go away from Toronto, like my first chapter, I talk about the Chinese cafe in Saskatchewan.
Outlook, yeah.
Outlook, where of course it is the other way, the other extreme, where it's basically a bacon and eggs and pork chops and potatoes and apple pie. Throw in with a bit of chop suey and egg roll. That's what they call a Chinese restaurant in Outlook, Saskatchewan.
Right.
So these are the two extremes, and in between you have all kinds of variation, some more than the others, depending on what their customers are like and who they want to attract.
Yes, yeah. And I loved the first essay in Outlook because Jim is so Canadian. You know, his dialogue and the way he treats everybody, it's like has this real Canadian feel, and yet he's so connected still to China and to his cultural identity. Mm-hmm. I loved that essay, and that it was a community center and that everybody hung out there. I thought it was beautiful. One of the not challenging, I think one of the most interesting parts about reading these essays were that many of the restaurant owners escaped communism, escaped the political uprising and conflict in China, and some of them only to find themselves in other conflict, or in the South Africa essay post-conflict, right? And trying to navigate the new different conflict that they were living in. What how can you speak to that experience and how they found a space inside new conflict, even though they were escaping it?
I would think that the most versatile traits of them all is adaptability,
Hmm.
meaning that you have no choice. You landed in this country. Perhaps that was the only country you could go to,
Hmm.
and you have to make a living, and you have to raise your family. So it's a very typical immigrant story, and it's no
Hmm.
different from Syrian refugees, Afghan refugees coming in to Canada right now. I mean, obviously, you will miss your home country, and obviously, you will face racism and discrimination, like everybody else. But you make a go at it, and you persevere, hard
Hmm.
work. You put your kids through school, and hopefully, they will become dentists and lawyers, and not a restaurant owner. But that's every immigrant's dream is
Hmm.
to have uh, the second generation move away from as far as possible from where they are
Yeah.
in terms of society, in terms of location and whatnot.
Hmm.
So I think it's a very kind of universal immigrant story. Every country, of course, has that kind of particular condition. In Africa, in South Africa, you have the post-apartheid society that the owner is living in. In Israel, I have a Christian pastor who landed in Israel as a
Hmm.
refugee, and he was not allowed to build a church. And the only way he can do it is in his restaurant on Friday, when he brings in the organ and start having his congregation in the restaurant. So that's the kind of thing that people adapt religiously,
Hmm.
culturally, socially.
Yeah, it was interesting. The Israel family, the kids were really conflicted. I think that essay more than most talked about the difference between nationality and raciality and culture in ways that the other essays didn't speak to as
And
much.
religion as well,
And religion, yeah, and that
right?
the the girls felt um like they weren't ever going to be Israeli because they, Israel is about nationhood more than it is about race or culture or anything. Um, and you just said something about the kids not the parents not wanting the kids to take over the restaurants. And yet what moved me, and not just the women in the Israel story, but what moved me was the kids who were born into the country in which they are now, and yet having the restaurant that they're working at and helping out at. I loved that strengthened or strengthens the cultural identity of the kids, right? More so than if the family moved to Israel and the parents became dentists or um, other jobs. That Chinese restaurants kind of keep that cultural string, that cultural bond tighter. Would you say that's accurate?
It's very true, because food is so important part of Chinese culture,
Hmm.
and through food you have a lot of communal kind of sharing, and retention of cultural and ethnic trait,
Hmm.
that is, in a sense, memory of home.
Yeah.
So food is, that's why I made the whole film series, and because people ask me, why did you pick Chinese restaurant? I said, well, I could have picked Chinese dentists around the world. They'll, they'll make for very boring and very
It
kind of
wouldn't. Yeah.
won't be good reading. But Chinese restaurants are basically like my Outlook Saskatchewan owner. It's a social center. It's where, not only do you give you get your kids working for you, first of all, and then and also you can bring in relatives from
Hmm.
your home village, and illegally or legally,
Hmm.
they come in, they have a foothold, into the society, and then slowly they take over or they merge into somewhere else.
Mhm.
The restaurant owner I just talked about in Sao Paulo, he owns 4 restaurants, and
Wow.
he since sold one of them to his cousin from China, and so to him it was like a central depot of people coming in, and they offer them a job, and they can learn a new trade and then survive, and then when they're independently enough to stand alone, then they
Mhm.
can move on to other things or maybe open new restaurants. But certainly restaurant can be a very good transitional place for a lot of immigrants, especially from China.
Yeah. I was thoughtful throughout reading and knowing that you were working on or finalizing the book at the beginning of the pandemic and publishing it towards the end. I was conscious of the past 2 years and the challenges with the emboldened racists and anti-Asian hate just uh, disgustingly being out in the, well, not that it ever was closeted, but I was thinking as I was reading these essays about the experiences of all these restaurant owners the world over during a global pandemic and the rising up of anti-Asian hate. Have you spoken to any of the restaurant owners and any of their experiences during the pandemic?
Restaurants are less so because I think in Toronto and Vancouver, we have the SARS of 2003.
Yeah,
They had a dry run of what to expect.
right.
When people were saying, oh, we don't want to go to Chinatown because the food is dirty and we might catch SARS. And it took a mayor or a few councillors or MPs to go actually publicly dine in Chinatown to demonstrate to the public that it is safe to eat in Chinatown. So in that sense, they have that protocol down pat. So I'm less worried about them. Obviously, every restaurant would suffer, but at least they know the protocol. What I see disheartening is videos of older people being beaten up in Chinatown. Those, I mean, those are plain racist hate being demonstrated and, fanned by politicians and who else. So I did address a few of these in terms of actually I belong to an organization that deals with these racism and inequality and of Chinese Canadians. So I'm aware of many of these things. That's why in my epilogue, I decided that I'm going to bring everything forward, and we actually talk about anti-Asian hate. And I think my conclusion was that there is a very distinctive separation between Western individualism of kind of freedom. I don't want to wear my mask because I don't feel like it.
Right.
And what I call Asian collectivism, in terms of, this is good for my community. I wear a mask because I want to protect my community. I don't want people to get it. It's not for my convenience or my inconvenience. So I think that's a big distinction. And I talk a lot about that in my epilogue with the chef Ken Hong, who expressed his whole kind of disgust over why are we we're not talking talking about mandates these days, it's for the good of everybody, I mean. So I think for the Asians and Chinese communities in particular, there's more of that kind of community centric way of
taking care of everybody as opposed to just taking care of
no
me.
matter it's your family or not. It's one community that we take care of each other. So in that sense, I think that's the contrast I was drawing in my epilogue.
Yeah. And it's
And that's
interesting
an
because
exemplary with all the characters I mentioned, because
Mhm.
to them, I landed here, but I want to make sure the other relatives or people coming after me can also find a space to live and to work and to
Mhm.
survive.
Yeah,
So that's the kind of spirit that they always carry in them in them.
yeah. And there's I think it's the third or fourth essay, or it might be not, where um, somebody talks about the joy of service, right? Like the joy of one gets from making other people happy. I found that very moving, given what we're living through right now. In that it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't seem like very many people find joy in making other people happy.
Mhm.
And so, have you eaten yet? Being a way to say, how are you? How can I make you happy? I love that. I hope so many people read this book because of that. I have a number of other questions, but as usual, I just keep going on before I ask everyone else. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and Kaylee will ask on your behalf as we go through. I'll just ask a couple more before we move on. It's hard to ask you to say what your favorite place was, or what wasn't your least favorite place was. So I won't do that. But I'm interested in how the Outlook Cafe and the few Chinese items he had on the menu, your experience with Chinese restaurants across Canada. Like the Western provinces have probably a longer history with Chinese immigrants because of the railway and everything. But how has your experience been with Chinese restaurants across Canada? Because if I get in a car, and because we take road trips constantly, if I get into a car, almost every small town has a Chinese restaurant, and I'm interested to know what your experience has been across Canada.
Well, I mean, that's not a fair question to ask me, just because, yeah, I make a big deal about authenticity, and I
Mhm.
kind of say I dodge the question in many ways, saying that what's authentic is what you grow up with. So in this
Right.
case of chop suey or egg rolls or chicken balls, sweet and sour chicken balls, if it's very Canadian, then certainly that's your authentic Chinese food.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I would go to a Chinese restaurant just because I know they have rice. And I'm down a quart, so I
Right.
get my rice when I'm traveling. And this is the reason why I started the whole adventure, was because I love to travel, and everywhere I went, I always go to a Chinese restaurant.
Mhm.
Not only to get the rice and the veggies and the kind of crave for the food I want, but also very interested and curious about how these people got there.
Yeah.
That's how I started. Actually, when I was in Istanbul in 1976, I visited this only Chinese restaurant in Istanbul, and that got me started in the whole journey about um, um, talking about Chinese diaspora, uh,
Mhm.
opening Chinese restaurants everywhere in the world. And so, yeah, so I'm always curious about what's happening behind the kitchen doors. How
Yeah.
did they get there? What do they plan for the next generation? And what kind of life they face after they immigrated or settle in the place.
Right. So if there was such a thing as an international skip the dishes, you wouldn't share with us the place in the world that you would order from today.
No, I mean, I have my own favorites in Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto, and Montreal. Yeah, but it's your taste, right? I mean, I can certainly give you a list of restaurants which I think are very, very, very authentic, but
Yeah.
that might not be your taste, right?
Yeah. I think it probably depends on who you are as an eater. right? Like whether or not you're an
Yeah.
adventurous eater, or whether or not you're the kind of person who's, this is what I'm craving today, and I've had it 1,000 other times in my life.
Yeah. Let me just, if you want one name,
Yeah.
I'll give you one.
Yes.
Blue Sky Restaurant on Spadina.
Blue Sky.
New Sky. New.
New Sky.
Yeah.
Got it.
I assume everyone here is mostly from Toronto, I assume. So I would not be, well, that's the place I go to quite often. Just because it serves really, really authentic down-home Cantonese food.
Nice.
And instead of the fancy, restaurants you find in Markham or Richmond Hill.
Right. With the giant fish tanks and
Yeah.
the
Right.
pick your own dinner. Yeah.
That's true.
Does anybody have any questions, Kaylee, before I just keep going? Sorry.
Yeah, we have one question from Wayne. And Wayne asks, you could have gone anywhere. So how much of your subject and destination choices were driven by your own wanderlust or the food itself or whatever?
Very simple. It's wanderlust. I skipped the cliche like San Francisco or London, and I really wanted to go to Amazon. I wanted to go to the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
So I was looking for places in there, and I'm always fascinated by culture that are non-Anglo-Saxon. So I love to hear Chinese speak Spanish and French. And I wanted to go to Africa and discover places that I'd never been to. So in that sense, it was pretty much determined by how much I want to explore in this world. And but luckily, I found interesting stories in each of the places I went.
Yeah. Speaking of languages, there were a number of people. I mean, you speak 5 languages.
3 plus dialects, 3 or 4
plus dialects, but you met a number of people, while writing the book, while making the films for the book, who speak many languages. I'm thinking about the daughter in Istanbul, and yeah. Did you, when you were, I don't want to lose track of this question that I have. When you were throwing out the net and discovering these restaurants, did you know before you went the history of the place, or did you discover when you went there? I'm interested.
I tried to do some research.
Yeah.
But one place that was really surprising was Madagascar. I never knew there were Chinese in Madagascar.
Right.
But Madagascar Chinese were there for 5 or 6 generations, even before the Europeans got to Madagascar. So that to me was a new discovery. And I hadn't read, there's not much written about Chinese in Madagascar. So in that sense, it was all new. Other places like Cuba, which to a lot of people may be surprising, but Havana was one of the 3 largest Chinatown in North America. The other 2 are San Francisco and Lima, Peru.
Wow.
So there's a huge Chinese presence in Peru, and the kind of national cuisine of Peru is called chifa, which is half Peruvian, half Chinese, in the sense that the Chinese brought the cultivation of rice into Peruvian diet, and it became amalgamated with the indigenous and the Spanish cuisine, and it's a new distinctive Chinese food called chifa. And chifa in the Chinese dialect means to eat,
right,
rice. So chifa is known as the Peruvian cuisine. So these are kind of surprising things that I never thought about. But then after I thought that I would go there, I would do some research, and then I had other people help me do some research, and That's the extent of research I've done. But the most interesting thing that I want to talk about is because Canada is so multicultural, and Toronto and Vancouver as well, I was able to make all my connection through Toronto.
Right.
In other words, just to give you an example, my next door office neighbor is somebody from Mauritius, a Chinese from Mauritius. So I befriended him, and he says, and one day I said, okay, I'd like to go to Mauritius to look for a Chinese restaurant. He said, oh, no problem. Go see my sister-in-law. She'll take you into all these places. So the first day I landed in Mauritius, I was taken to a big lunch with 10, 20 people.
Yeah.
They're all kind of community leaders who come together because here's Canadian coming to make a film on us. So we all kind of take them off a dim sum, and that's where I make all my connection. And I make all my connection through Toronto.
That's amazing.
There's a huge South African Chinese community in Toronto.
A South African Chinese community?
Exactly.
Wow.
And the South Africa and the Johannesburg Chinese School has an annual alumni dance that is huge.
Wow.
There are a lot of people, Chinese from South Africa. In Montreal, there's a whole contingent of Chinese Madagascar who are French speaking. So they all migrated to Montreal. And when I was showing my film in Montreal, young people would come up to me, hey, I'm from, my grandfather's from Madagascar, and I saw this stuff, and I saw in my, it's all like home and all this stuff. So there's a lot of connection just from Canada alone that allows me to go to all these places and gets me into the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love that. Makes me proud to be from Toronto. I think that we are so connected to these global communities.
Yeah.
That's great. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, we have another one from Wayne. Wayne asks, how did this project impact your own growth? Is it possible that you seeking stories was also you organizing your own?
Yes, in a sense. I wasn't aware of that when I was making my film, but a film critic of mine, a friend of mine, pointed out that, Chuck, what you were doing is trying to find acknowledgement of your own being, because I'm a member of what I call a card-carrying member of the Chinese diaspora. I lived in 3 or 4 cultures before I got to Toronto. And so I gone through life pretty much like the people I show in the film 3 or 4 times over. And my friend was saying, hey, you're just trying to acknowledge your existence by connecting with people. And I agree with him. I never thought of it that way. And yeah, he was right. So yeah, it's a very life affirming way. And in a sense, writing this book it's actually at my age now, it's also very kind of, in a sense, wrapping up my life, kind of reminiscing and putting things in order, like you said. Yeah.
I hope that doesn't mean that you're not going to make any more films, or that you're not going to write anything else.
No, I only make 1 film in my life. That was this film.
Yeah.
And I'm going to write only 1 book in my life. That's this book. The reason for that is that I'm not a writer. I'm not a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I'm making a film to tell the stories, and I'm writing the book to tell the stories. I'm not going to say I'm going to write another book and make some money out of it. No,
Right.
It's a passion project in that sense.
Right. And your cinematographer, Koi, is that how you Kwa?
Yeah.
Oh
He's a
my
character.
gosh.
He's a character.
He so comes alive in every single essay. You expose just a little bit more about him, and I loved he literally has a narrative arc through this collection, which, if for no other reason, I urge people to read this book, because Kwa is like just fascinating. Thank you so much for giving us him. Does anyone else have any more questions? No, it's good. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I mean, I want to talk about this book forever. I want to ask you particular questions about each and every restaurant, but we would be here all night, I think. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about? Anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to share about any one of your friends, restaurant owners?
Nothing. Well, there are a lot of stories to share, but I want to share with you one incident in Istanbul that in 1976.
Mm-hmm.
I met somebody who happened to be a serial killer.
Wow.
And for years, he was a mixed racial French and Vietnamese. And we met for dinner at the Chinese restaurant that I eventually wrote about.
Mm-hmm.
We had drinks and we spent 2 days together in Istanbul being a tourist. And I knew at that time he was a bad guy.
Yeah.
In the sense of he told me that he had killed people and drugged people, and he was wanted by the Interpol. But he's also a very charming guy. He was writing poetry in French, and we were talking about Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre and all these philosophical questions.
Yeah.
So, absolutely charming guy. So I never met him afterwards. And then in the 80s, I read biographies of him that found out who he really was.
Wow.
But even at that time, there was the name he gave me was not the name in the news. So I read this biography and looked at his picture and said, well, not quite the same guy that I met, maybe, although he has a very similar backstory. And even after I wrote the book, I wrote it in the opening section in my Istanbul story about how I met this person. And then even after I wrote it, my manuscript, I was watching Netflix. There's a series called The Serpent. It's about some guy living in Bangkok and India, and he was drugging tourists, and he has a Canadian accomplice, his girlfriend. And then even then, I was kind of saying, hey, maybe that's not the right guy. But the actor that portrayed him actually looks very much like the person I met.
Wow.
And then there's one scene where he went back to to France to visit his mother, who has since married his stepfather with a French name, and that's the same name he gave me in Istanbul.
Wow.
For 2 seconds on screen, does that name show up? And I say, that's him. That was a guy I met like 40 years ago in Istanbul.
Yeah.
But he's in prison right now, so it's okay.
So we can talk. We can talk about him. Yeah, that's fun. That and the getting robbed in Mombasa, and then the essay where you're living in a John Woo movie. Yeah. There were so just little moments throughout that I thought these characters, these real people, these characters could be a movie, like a fictional full-length movie.
Yes, that's what I really liked about the way the stories are unfolding, is that you never know what life will bring you, and I'm happy that I could capture all these stories in the book.
Yes, I am excited for everybody. We have 2 copies from Douglas and McIntyre to raffle off, so maybe you will be lucky enough to get a copy to read. If not, you can buy it directly from Douglas and McIntyre, or go to a local independent bookseller if you can. If you can't, do Indigo, and purchase your copy. Thank you so much for joining us, Kaylee. We have 2 copies. I'm so excited.
All right. All right, so our first winner for today is Jennifer M. Manley, which we have a Jen. Was gonna say, I don't know if that's the Jen. It's always hard to
Yes,
say
that's
with.
me. Great. Thanks so much. Thank you.
I pull the names from the Eventbrite, and sometimes it doesn't quite match the names
No,
that folks have.
that's me. Thanks very much. Thanks. That's great.
Amazing. Congratulations, Jen.
Thank you.
And our second one is Marlene Enns. Marlene Enns. I believe Marlene is.
Marlene Enns is from Vancouver.
Oh, wow.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Marlene, how are you?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I got my book. I have my book here already. So would
Yeah,
you
but
like?
you want to give it to somebody else?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. You can, I'm going to say, if you can send me an email to junctionrights@gmail.com, you can nominate somebody else. I just need their mailing address. And it's way better to just give me the mailing address directly, because I've mailed some books and they cost in Canada anywhere from $10 to $14 to mail, regular
Yes.
postal. So send me.
Okay, I would prefer that you don't. I would like to donate it to somebody who's here today.
Oh, okay,
because
we can.
Because I'm going to buy a whole box of the books.
Oh, amazing.
Just to
we
let you
will-
know who Marlene is. Marlene, if do you mind if I tell people who you are?
No, go ahead.
Marlene's is a widow of Jim Wong Chu, whom I dedicated the book to.
Oh, nice.
Jim Wong Chu is what we call the godfather of Asian American writing or Asian Canadian writing.
Yes.
He's from Vancouver, and for years he nurtured Asian Canadian writers. And I've known Jim and Marlene for 40 years, and
Wow.
Yeah, we went through all this, promoting Asian writers. And as you all know, we have a little bit of a barrier when it comes to mainstream publication and having our stories being recognized as universal and being told just like other people in Canada. So, and Jim Wong Chu was a pioneer in helping and nurturing Asian Canadian writers through the 4 years that he's in this field.
Oh, that's great.
That's why my book is dedicated to him.
That's nice. That's a beautiful story. Marlene, thanks for joining us. And if that's okay with you, Kaylee can just raffle another name, if that's okay.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, I'll pull another name. And the second winner for today is Dorleen Lynn.
Yay. That's great. Okay, so both of you, Darlene and Jen, if you can send me an email to Junction Rights, not Junction Reads, junctionrights@gmail.com, and just give me your address. I will get Karina at Douglas and McIntyre to send those books off, and she's really good at getting them out right away. So you should have it by the end of the week.
Wonderful. May I say something? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Hi there, Cheuk. I just wanted to tell you that I know Kwa. So I can't wait to read your characterization of him. He's quite the character.
And you are Jen? Are you Jen? Who are you?
No, Dorleen.
Dorleen. I just won the book. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Dorleen Lynn.
Dorleen Lynn.
Dorleen Lynn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm Taiwanese, so yeah.
Okay. Right.
You will. I hope that you will love.
Oh, I'm sure.
Love it as much as I do.
I know the films already because Kwa's a cameraman and I work in the production business, so that's how I know it. But wonderful to
That's a small world. It's nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Cheuk. This was a pleasure, a real pleasure. I appreciate this book. I am sad that there won't be more. I did have a question about the potential of turning some of them into filmic short stories, but I really appreciate your answer and wanting to close the loop on this incredible adventure that you've been on. Congratulations on your new grandfatherhood. That's
Thank you.
Going to be fantastic. I think twins.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone else for joining Junction Reads today and joining in on the conversation. I love that when that happens at the end of our events. Thank you, Kaylee, our event coordinator, for being an incredible support to Junction Reads. I hope you will join us on March 6th. We will have Silma Abdullah, who is joining with her collection of short stories, The Floating Lily. Oh, sorry, got the name wrong.
Home of the Floating Lily.
Yes, Home of the Floating Lily. And you can follow us at junctionreads.ca and all social media. And please, Dorleen and Jen, when you get your books, if you can tag us in a photo of it when it arrives, we can continue the publicity for Have You Eaten Yet and for Cheuk Kwan and this incredible journey. Thank you, everybody. Happy Sunday. Take care.
Thank you, Chuck. I'll see
Happy
you in
Family Day.
Vancouver.
Bye.